Hello, Our Lady Perpetual Help. Glad to be with you again to speak to you about the Chronicles of Narnia and specifically The Magician's Nephew. The Magician's Nephew is chronologically the first book in the series, but it doesn't make sense if you read Magician's Nephew before The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. So we started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe so that all the things that go on in The Magician's Nephew will make a little bit more sense contextually. But the story it starts with Polly and Diggory and their relationship growing up, and their Diggory moves into London and meets Polly, and Diggory is crying when Polly first meets him, and Diggory reveals to Polly that they moved there because his father's in India and his mother is sick, and he fears that she may die. So he's in a pretty sad state. And Polly meets him where he is, and they become good friends, and they start doing all kinds of adventures. And they wanted to visit an abandoned house, and so there's some rafters that are connected, uh, and they decide they're gonna go try and find this abandoned house and see what happens. And they have all kinds of uh, imagination. They let their imagination run wild of what they might find there. And so they travel among the rafters and they're counting out, trying to figure out exactly where they are. But they find out that they miscount. They go only, uh, they don't go to where they thought they were going to go. They actually end up in Diggory's house, up in Uncle Andrew, or the magician that his uncle, yeah, Uncle Andrew, Mr. Kennelly, what Polly calls him. But this man, who more or less Diggory is asked not to stay away from him because he's not super kind, and his aunt, uh, Uncle Andrew's sister, wants to make sure that he doesn't do anything to Diggory. So they end up in the study of Uncle Andrew, and Uncle Andrew is overjoyed to see them, which is definitely an interesting thing. And he goes over and locks the door right when they enter in. They could theoretically still climb back through the rafters, but they're there now. I think they fall down through the rafters or come down through the rafters. And Uncle Andrew wants to use them for an experiment. And the way in which Uncle Andrew interacts with the children is very interesting. Like he's very he wants what he wants, and he's only interested in what he's interested in, and anything outside of what he's interested in, he slides around it. So you can see sort of that manipulation, and maybe some of that pride and vanity that come up a little bit later in the story. But he tricks Polly to take one of the rings, and when he takes the ring, I think it's the yellow ring that Polly takes, she vanishes. She goes out of the world, and Diggory is very angry and asks Uncle Andrew, "What did you do?" And so he explains the whole situation, where he created the rings from this dust and tried many different experiences to get to the point where he was now, trying to figure out what these rings did. And he knew that they sort of took them out of the world, not just to a different place in their world, but in a different world entirely. And so he's trying to figure it out, and he does all kinds of experiments on guinea pigs. And his experiment last night was to use a yellow ring on a guinea pig to see what would happen, and the guinea pig vanished just like Polly. And so he's developed two rings, the yellow rings, which take, by his knowledge right now, by Uncle Andrew's knowledge right now, takes whatever it touches out of the world into a new world, and then the green rings take you back. So his uh, Uncle Andrew's plan is to give Diggory a yellow ring and two green rings so as to get Polly and bring them back, because Uncle Andrew reveals that he would not ever do the experiment himself. He definitely shows himself to be very sort of self-centered and cruel in his interactions with the children, and so he more or less blackmails Diggory into saving or going to save Polly, and that's the only thing Diggory could do in justice. He recognizes he has to do this thing, not unlike Peter in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, recognizing that they need to go save Tumnus when they enter into the land of Narnia later. So Diggory vanishes, and he ends up in this strange place, this uh, wood between the worlds, which they don't really know exactly what it is at first, but he arrives and he's very peaceful, and sort of all his worries and troubles go away. He sees a girl there, and he doesn't really know the girl, not off the top of his head, and but he seems like he might know her, and so he begins to speak to her, and he asked where did she come from, and she said I've been here always, and she asked him and where he's come from, and he says as well, I've been here always, and she said no you haven't, I saw you come here. And so they start to parcel it out and realize that this is, of course, Polly and Diggory. And they see a guinea pig with a yellow ring attached to him in the wood as well. And so they're just in this place of peace and comfort. And they know that they need to go back, but Diggory is interested in going on an adventure. He's very inquisitive and very adventurous. That's what got them into Uncle Andrew's study in the first place, both Polly as well. But they want to make sure that they can get back to their homeland first. So they figure out the rings, and the rings didn't necessarily work the way Uncle Andrew thought. So the green rings want to get out of that world, and the yellow rings want to get in the world. And so when you wear a yellow ring, you go into the wood between the worlds. And when you wear a green ring and go to one of these portals, one of these pools of the wood, you get transported to the new world, or the different world. So they figure it out and finally put on the green rings. They have their yellow rings in their pocket. And they put on their green rings and go back towards London. But as they go back, then they take off the rings and they switch it back to the yellow rings. And then they are going back to the wood between the worlds, where they then say, okay, now we can go adventuring. And so Diggory is very excited about going elsewhere, and almost to the point where he forgets to mark the pool that leads them back to London, because there are several pools in that area and they don't want to get lost. So thanks to Polly, they remember to mark the pool that takes them back to London before they go exploring. So then they go and they go through another pool. They put on their green rings and jump in that pool, and the green pool takes them to the world of Charn, which is a very interesting place. It is got a very red-like hue, and sort of like it's a broken world in a lot of ways, and there's nobody there that they can see. And they see this row of people, and a big castle, then a big castle, and they see this row of people, and they look at all the different people, and the people have kind faces in the beginning, and then maybe more stern faces, and then faces that show sort of the pain of maybe sin until they come to this last statue of a beautiful woman who looks very cruel. Uh, and so they're searching around and they see a little bell. And that little bell says, if uh, you ring the bell, see what happens. If not, you might, you know, always be wondering what this this sound is, or what the bell would do. So Diggory is very keen on figuring out. Like I said, he's very inquisitive. And Polly says, "Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea." And so then they get into a fight, Polly and Diggory. And so it's very interesting the way in which they fight. Diggory sort of has sort of almost a similar mentality to Uncle Andrew, very focused on what he wants and not being concerned with anybody else. And they start fighting, and it's very interesting to me that throughout the whole series, there's this sort of dynamic of it's just like a man or just like a woman, sort of this basic argument. Like instead of meeting each other where they are, you know, it's sort of putting each other in that box, and that man and that woman dynamic. Just that's the way that they are, and that's the way that they'll be. Is very, you know, it never leads to anything good. I think in all the books, whenever that argument sort of comes up, you see sort of that brokenness in the relationship between man and woman, in sort of that, you know, using it as an excuse or an attack. Um, but anyway, Diggory, very focused on what he wants to do, regardless of what Polly wants, actually holds on to Polly so that she can't leave and rings the bell, uh, even though Polly doesn't want him to do it. And that ringing of the bell has many dire consequences, which we'll see in a little bit. First and foremost, it awakens the queen, but causes also the destruction of the castle around. The queen that was awoken go over and approaches Diggory and Polly, and you start to get the feeling that this queen is very much similar to Uncle Andrew, and she's concerned of why, you know, why she was awoken, but she's mostly concerned on, you know, who has summoned her, who has awoken her, and of course that was Diggory, and so she doesn't pay any mind to Polly, and she's looking for some spark of a musician, and she says, "You don't have the look. You don't have. You're just a common boy." And he says, "Yeah, it's my uncle Andrew sent us." And so she starts to reveal some of herself, some of the her power and authority as queen. But then, as the castle continues to break around them, they have to relocate. And after they relocate, they have to bust through a door, and she uses her magic to turn this big metal door into dust, showing her power. She says, "Does your uncle have this kind of power?" And she says, "No matter, I'll find out when I get there." Uh, and she reveals that she wants to go back to the world because she's like, "Well, you know, that's why have you come here if not to bring me back to your world?" And you see sort of her pride and her her vanity, as well as her power. She reveals this big war that happened in Chan, which is the city that they're in, and says that she used magic called the deplorable word, also showing herself to be a queen that isn't concerned about anyone other than herself. The deplorable word kills every living thing aside from the person who cast it. She reveals that many of the previous kings promised, made oaths not to go searching for this magic. She found it, and she said she paid a great cost for it. But she used it when she was had lost her the war with her sister. She's in battle with her sister, And Diggory says, uh, oh, but what about the people? And she's like, what people? And said, all the common people. And the queen said, this is, it doesn't, they don't, they're just there to serve me. So this mindset of leadership in service of a person uh, only works, of course, with God. When we're serving ourselves or serving individuals, there's brokenness and problems there. But the queen reveals her name, Jadis. Not that we use that very often, but that shows herself to be a great queen, and she more or less, desires to take them. She wants to go back to Earth to conquer it if necessary. That's sort of her intention. So like looking to be done with this place. She's done all she could here, and then now she's moving on to the next world. Very focused on her own pride. And she also reveals her pride in, you know, figuring out that, she wants to go back to the world, and Diggory and Polly reveal that, Uncle Andrew didn't really send for them, and she doesn't believe them. She's like, no, that's not true. And Uncle Andrew must very powerful and sought me out. So, very, again, very vain in her portrayal of herself. And so Diggory and Polly try and get away, and she has Polly's hair. Uh, she's being vicious to Polly, and so they put on their or put they stick their hands in their yellow rings pocket, and they go to the wood between the worlds again. And Jadis actually follows them through the transportation, because the rings act like a magnet. So like whenever someone's touching somebody else, they pull whoever's touching them there, and so they end up in this world again. And their intention is to go home. And Jadis loses a lot of her power. She feels sick, as they felt peace and security. The witch being very much, overcome with the evil deeds and evil actions of her past, has like this sickness in a place of peace. So she loses a lot of her power in this place, and so they are able to get her to remove her hands from Polly, and they mean to leave her there. Um, and but she grabs onto Diggory right before he goes back to the world, and so they go back to London, back to Uncle Andrew's study with Jadis unintentionally, and Jadis encounters Uncle Andrew and finds that Uncle Andrew is not this great, powerful musician like like she had hoped and thought. And so she's like, okay, fine, I'll just go rule the world then. And so she more or less, takes control of the situation, says, Uncle Andrew, get me a chariot or a dragon or some suitable mount for my, to show my station, my to be queen. And she goes and uh, with Uncle Andrew out, and she causes a whole bunch of problems in their home, encountering Uncle Andrew's sister, Aunt Letty, and Aunt Letty thinks that she's, some circus person because she has no sleeves on her hands, and she wants her to leave, and the queen has none of it, so like throws her in violence. And thankfully, Uncle Letty, being a strong aunt and caretaker, is fine. But they put out the queen and Uncle Andrew leave, and then Diggory and Aunt Letty are all trying to figure out what to do, as well as Polly goes home, and Polly calls Diggory to task for the cruelness that he showed her in the world of Charn, where he hurt her and did all those things, and he seeks her apology, and she gives it to him. But Diggory's concerned about his mother because his mother's sick in that house, and as well as all of London. This terror of this queen, this witch, terrorizing London. So their intention is to try and get her back to her own world. So happens it's 3 hours, 4 hours later. Diggory's thinking on many different things, how they can get her back. But then someone brought Diggory's mother some grapes, and Aunt Letty speaks of the world of youth, or the the fountain of youth, or the fruit of youth, or whatever, and Diggory, just experiencing this reality of magical worlds, says, "Okay, well, maybe this is possible," and so like he has this hope uh, that he might be able to do something to help his mother. And so, as he's thinking on this, the queen comes back and on a chariot, not chariot, a carriage, and the carriage has a horse, and they crash the carriage, and you find out that Uncle Andrew's in the carriage, and then there's a bunch of policemen and all kinds of hullabaloo, and you find out that the queen has stole a bunch of pearls, and Uncle Andrew tried to wine and dine her, but found that he was just in a bad situation, because she's seeking to rule the world, more or less, and she has no concern about anyone. Uh, and so even Uncle Andrew recognizes that she's not a good person to be around. So uh, she's back with a horse, Strawberry, which we'll get to meet a little bit later. But the cabbie, who's the one that normally rides the horse and the buggy, comes and says, "We need to take care of this horse, because if she keeps riling up that horse, someone's gonna get killed, because the horse used to be a war horse." And so she keeps making the White Witch keeps making the horse more and more vicious, and then the police come and they're trying to arrest her, and she picks up a iron off of a light post and knocks a bunch of them out. And so then Diggory acts, and Polly as well, and so they grab hold of her and warp again to this world, the wood between the worlds. They all are there, and they brought the cabbie and the horse and the witch, as well as Polly and Uncle Andrew and Diggory. So all of them are there, and so Diggory and Polly quickly move to go to another world, and they're trying to bring her back to Charn, but they couldn't. They went to this world that has more or less nothing there. So they arrive in this world, and the cabbie thinks they might have fallen down a well, and the horse has calmed down. Going to the wood between the worlds has calmed him down, and so he's nice and calm. And the children thought they were going to Charn, but they ended up in this world, as opposed to Charn. And then Uncle Andrew is just asking for some brandy, and he's complaining. He really he goes from being the big bad, the person who's orchestrating the things that children are doing in the beginning to becoming sort of just like this sad, uh, unfortunate man that you feel sort of sorry for in his age and concern only for himself. You'll get more and more. Uh, we'll get more and more of that as the story progresses. So they're in this empty world, and the witch recognizes this as an empty world, and she's like, "It's my doom." And Uncle Andrew also is like, "Oh, don't say that." It's just very funny, the interaction. Sort of like you see like Uncle Andrew from this great uh, problem, this evil in the beginning, to just a nuisance when you encounter the White Witch, encountering real evil versus the evil of just being selfish and vain, as Uncle Andrew is. So the cabbie starts singing because he used to be a choir boy, and he thinks that, well, there's nothing to do except for wait, and so he sings a hymn, and the children join in, and it's sort of this beautiful scene of, you see sort of the merits of the cabbie, and now the horse is calm. But they're in this empty world, and they're on solid ground, but they don't really experience anything else until there's this great singing. And so beautiful, beautiful thing, the most beautiful thing they've ever heard. And it's the creation of the world. They eventually see a lion, uh, and he's singing as well, and then the singing from the heavens commence as well, and things start popping up, and as he's singing and moving along, uh, more things are happening. So trees are growing and mountains and everything else, and Uncle Andrew and the witch are just, this is terrible, and they're afraid of the lion, and Uncle Andrew is thinking, what uh, monetary value he might be able to draw out of this place. And the beauty of everything going on is just they don't see it. Both Uncle Andrew and the witch are oblivious to, and the witch is concerned about uh, the lion as well, because she understands the magic in which he's using to create the world. And so he's moving around, and all kinds of things are happening. And as the lion gets closer, the witch throws the iron piece that she broke off from the lamppost and hits the lion square in the face, but it doesn't do anything, and so she runs off. And the lion just continues to move around and continues to create all the things, even to the point of bringing animals into the world. And so he sings a song that makes mounds pop up and then animals pop out of the ground, and an amazing kind of thing. Um, and then after that, he draws all the animals to himself, and then all the animals, including Strawberry, go over and just surround Aslan, and this world created in front of them. Aslan then begins to speak. Of course, the animals are all speaking to Aslan, and he reveals himself to them. He says uh, to them, awake, love, think, and speak." Just this part, the awakening of the animals, giving them an intellect, giving them those divine qualities that we attest to being human, being like God, the intellect and the will, the ability to choose and the ability to think. He gives these same aspects to the animals. So they're no longer wild beasts, but thinking, loving, and just very much like humans. And in this, the first thing he does is after he gives them himself, uh, they actually are the first ones to speak Aslan's name. It's known just by their very creation, by giving them an intellect. They know his name is Aslan, which I think is important. He then takes some of the animals away to give them counsel. As 5 hours in, he says, evil has entered into this world that he's created, obviously referring to the witch, maybe to a smaller extent, Uncle Andrew. And so he goes off with some of the animals, and then the other animals approach, uh, are just talking and learning and speaking. Uh, and the children go over because Diggory remembers that this land, it sees this land is, teeming with life as it's just been created. And so he wants to see if he can ask the lion for some help for his mother since she's sick, remember. And so they go over to the animals and they seek to speak to Strawberry. The cabbie wants to speak to Strawberry as well. And they talk about the relationship they had prior to his awakening. And he said it's all muddy, but he remembers some things out of, but most and foremost, they just sort of recognize both Strawberry and the cabbie that it was a hard world that they came from. Speaking of the hard pavement, but then just the difficulty of working out our salvation through our labors can be a difficult thing. They so they ask Strawberry if Diggory can ride over to Aslan, and he allows it. And they approach Aslan, and the interesting thing is when he approaches Aslan, Aslan says, "This is the one. This is the one who did it, who brought evil into my world." Uh, and it's not condemnation, but it's just truth. It's just the recognition that that's what Diggory did, maybe not intentionally, but through his actions, the witch came into the world, and this is why he was taking counsel with the other animals, and so immediately seeking to fight against this evil. But Aslan, this is probably my favorite part: the encounter of Aslan with Diggory, the recognition that we're open before our God. Diggory feels this openness to speaking to Aslan, and Aslan draws him out. And so honesty pours forth from him, similar to the sacrament of reconciliation, in the recognition that we need to tell our God what we've done so that he can help us move forward. And that's what he does. And Diggory then asks about his mother, because that's why he wanted to approach Aslan. And Aslan says and knows his sorrow. Before Diggory brings up that, he is asking for Aslan's saying, we have to deal with this evil. We need to safeguard this place that I've built, and asks him to take a part in that. But Aslan says, I will take the brunt of it on myself. But because humans brought them into this world, brought this evil into this world, humans should have a part in fighting against it. The recognition that we need to work with God against evil, against our own sins and failings. So lots of things happen here. I'm getting the way in which it came about mixed up. But he's concerned about his mother. Diggory speaks to Aslan, and he sees true sorrow in Aslan's eyes. And Aslan says, "You and I are the only two that know of this sorrow, the sorrow of his mother." And seeing the love of Aslan's that he has for him, for Diggory, and for his mother, uh, just it awakens the recognition of Aslan's love, God's love for us. But he needs to do his task first. And so Aslan asks him if he will do what's necessary to safeguard Narnia. And Diggory says yes, he does. He will. He doesn't know how. And but Aslan doesn't ask for him to come up with a method. He wants his affirmative and says, "Yeah, of course I'll do it, Aslan, but I hope you're not in a hurry." And Aslan, of course, has something else in mind. The book cover has a picture of the winged horse. So Strawberry is asked by Aslan, would you like to be winged?" And Strawberry says yes. And Aslan says, "Be winged." And so Strawberry becomes Fledged, the first winged horse of Narnia. And uh, just the power of Aslan and creating, in creation, this whole scene, Aslan is creating and changing and bringing beauty into the world. Uh, now, and it's always for a purpose. And so we see that in Fledge being winged so that he can carry Polly and Diggory to safeguard Narnia. And so they send them for this tree of life. And Aslan says, when you see this tree, go. It will prevent the witch from coming into the area. And so they go on this journey, and they travel a day, and then they have to rest. And Fledge is perfectly happy eating grass, but Polly and Diggory uh, can't eat grass and don't know what to do, and they forgot to ask Aslan. I think that was also a very interesting part where, uh, I think Polly says, "Well, shouldn't they have known we needed some food?" And Fledge says, "I think Aslan obviously knew, but I think he likes to be asked. The recognition that we need to ask for what we need. Not that God doesn't know what we need, but asking is a piece of what we're called to do." But they remember. Polly remembers she has toffee in her hand, in her pocket, and so they eat some toffee and then plant the last one as they see this world is bringing things into reality, bringing things up from the ground that normally wouldn't grow, like the lamppost uh, that fell from the witch sprung up and became the lamppost that we remember in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That lamppost coming from the witch became this beautiful light in this world. But they continue their journey. They eat the freshly grown toffee plant that grows up in the night, and they have that for breakfast. And Fledge has some more grass, and then they continue on their journey. Once they get to the place where the tree is, they have to Fledge and Polly stay back, and it's Diggory's job to go in. They had originally planned on going with them, but it was Diggory who was asked to go into the wood to get the apple, and only Diggory that could go in. And so he sees this plaque that says, "Those who enter in can only enter in for someone else. It shouldn't be for your own purposes." So this getting of the apple gets to some hard moral choices for Diggory. Uh, and more than that, we see also the witch becoming the white witch as well. So he goes in, gets the fruit, and struggles with that a lot. But then the witch then gets the fruit and eats it, becomes white, uh, and then runs after Diggory. And Diggory runs away and gets to Fledge and Polly, and then the witch says to him, I just wanted to tell you something. I just want you to know you could miss out. He's like, why? She asked him, why are you serving this lion? Why are you serving Aslan? He hasn't done anything for you. He doesn't care. And it's that stare that he saw Aslan, the sadness and the recognition of his sadness and love for Diggory and his mother, that sort of allows him to overcome that temptation. Because the witch says, if you give this fruit to yourself or to your mother, you'll live forever. And Diggory says something very profound. He says, I'd rather die and go to heaven, right? And that's the reality. We don't want to live forever. But it hurts him the most not to be able to get it to his mother. But again, like her cruelty and the way in which she tries to manipulate him uh, allows him to see the true evil of her intention. And so through that, he's able to overcome the temptation and goes to Aslan, brings the fruit to him, and then they plant the fruit. And of course, like everything else in the world, it comes up fairly quickly. And so then they talk to Aslan, and Aslan helps them understand the temptation, but then also he talks about the way things are created always speak to their nature. So the tree of life is going to give her life, give the witch, the white witch, now eternal life. And if he was to bring that fruit to his mother, he would also do the same thing. But the effect is much more terrible. The sin that lingers, the going against what God wants us to do, is much more destructive than anything that the good it could bring. And so that hard lesson is taught to the children, Polly and Diggory. Um, but then he says, now that you've done as you're supposed to, the tree will keep her away, since she took that fruit when she shouldn't have. She's now finds it terrible and doesn't want to go near it. So protect Aslan, protect Narnia for many hundred years. Um, but then Aslan says, you can have one of the fruits to take home to your mother, uh, because you originally went and got the fruit for Narnia, to protect Narnia. If any of the Narnians had went, because it was for selfish reasons to protect their world, it would not have been a good thing. Though it still would protect them, it would still, for selfish reasons, leads to not the good that Aslan wants us to do, or Aslan is asking them to do. And so then, when he's given the fruit by Aslan, it will be for good. And Aslan says, though it will not give her eternal life, it will heal her when it goes back to our world. So Aslan meets with the children right before they send him back. Also, this is important. The cabbie becomes the king. His wife is brought into the world, and they become the first king and queen of Narnia. And the crowns are made from some money that fell out of Uncle Andrew's pockets, and it grew into a gold and a silver tree. And they made dwarves made beautiful crowns for the new king and queen of Narnia. And that whole scene where uh, the the weight of the world is sort of taken away from the cabbie. His all the difficulties he underwent. are sort of stripped away in this reawakening, renewing of his soul as Aslan speaks to him. And Aslan calls him to be king, and he says, I'm not well learned." And Aslan says, "Well, all you need to do, are you willing to give yourself to other people and protect others? Are you willing to protect these people and to not serve their own good?" Because both when we see in Uncle Andrew and we see in the Queen, this self-serving, like my people are to serve me, so much so that she kills all her people through the deplorable word, uh, in service of her own ends, where a true king, a true queen, is called to serve, at our own danger, our own difficulty, for others. So I think that that whole scene of making them king and queen are beautiful. But Diggory and Polly and the cabbie are all sent home, and it's through Aslan's magic. The cabbie stays. I'm sorry, the cabbie is now going to stay as the new king, with his wife as the new queen in Narnia. But then Polly and Uncle Andrew and Diggory are all sent home, and they become great friends. And they give Diggory gives his mother the fruit, and she's miraculously healed. And the doctors are all amazed. And Aslan asks them to do two things: one, to bury the rings when they get home. So Polly takes care of that, where Diggory takes care of his mother. And then just a warning, uh, in the dangers to come as the world grows older. The witch, when she hears of our world, she's like, "Oh, it's a young world," and she's very hungry for power in that. So the dangers of, as a world gets older, more dangers come, like the deplorable word. That danger is a reality in our world today. How we use our power, for in service of others, needs to be the main focus. And so Aslan calls the children to task in that. But the after Diggory's mother has the fruit, they plant the the seed, and it grows into a beautiful tree, that has very good apples, not life-giving apples like the one that he brought, but the best apples in London is what the book says. But that tree, becomes very important as that tree grows, and then it gets knocked down, in a thunderstorm. And they talk about how the tree blows sometimes when there's no wind, because maybe there's some big winds in Narnia, or vice versa. Maybe there's some big winds in. It's sort of attached. It has an attachment to the place where it came from. And so when it's knocked over, Diggory has the wardrobe, made out of its wood, and that becomes, of course, the passageway for the children in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe into Narnia. And so this story is a beautiful story. I love its creation imagery and sort of, how the looking at how you know selfishness or vanity, in Uncle Andrew or the witch, you know, is so dangerous, and how the children, even have to fight against some of this temptation. So it's a beautiful book, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it. I look forward to speaking to you about it, this coming Friday. God bless you, and talk to you soon.